Hello and welcome to Live from America podcast. This is Hatem. Noam is away this week, but comedian Boris Hyken is here, and our guest of honor is Dr. Gupta. Sunetra Gupta is a novelist and professor of theoretical epidemiology at the University of Oxford with an interest in infectious disease agents that are responsible for HIV, malaria, influenza, bacterial pneumonia, and meningitis. Dr. Gupta has been a critic of lockdowns in the pandemic. She was one of the primary authors of the Great Barrington Declaration in 2020, which advocated lifting COVID-19 restrictions on low-risk groups to develop herd immunity through infection, while stating that vulnerable people should be protected from the virus. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Live from America podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, a lot of times, it's very interesting. I appreciate your work because during that time, and now and before that, but especially I feel during that time, we still have not learned from COVID. I see a lot of people, we went through hell and back and nobody really learned a lot of lessons. And I think a lot of lessons is not everything is political. Not everything is, we have to listen to different points of view. And even in this show, sometimes I interview some of the, and Boris knows that, the best of the best in a lot of their fields, and they don't know. There's a lot of things that they don't know. When you ask them a common sense question, they will be like, no, you can't question that. So I know you did a lot of work and you had a lot of shows about trust the sign. What does it mean to trust the sign? The public understanding of science, all that. But first, let's talk about, during COVID, because you were a big critic of the lockdown during the pandemic. So can you give us just a little bit of rundown of what happened during that time?
So basically, I've been working on infectious diseases for a very long time, and it seemed to me, and one of the things I do is to use mathematical models to gain insights into how these diseases spread and how they evolve. And so when COVID arrived on the scene, or when we first got to know about it, it seemed to me that we were looking at something which was not completely unknown. There were 4 other coronaviruses co-circulating at the time and still are there. So it belonged to a family of coronaviruses with which we already had an acquaintance, and which we'd all been infected by other members of this coronavirus family. So, and what we knew already at that point is that these coronaviruses did not cause significant deaths. So we know they're there. We know that there's some elderly people and a few tiny babies who do die from these other coronaviruses, but they're not a threat. We don't think of them in the way we think of influenza or some of the other pathogens, malaria, TB, all these things that really kill people, large numbers of people. So it seemed to me that it was best to try and understand what was going to happen with this pathogen from the point of view of what we already knew about its cousins. And it was clear right from the start that the people who were dying from it were elderly people, probably because they'd never seen that particular coronavirus before, and that most of the rest of the population weren't going to die from it. They might get ill, they might not get ill at all, we just didn't know. But it was clear that the risk of death was low in the majority of the population. So when it started to spread, and by the time we knew about it, it would have already have arrived pretty much in most countries in the world that are well connected to the rest of the world. And it was likely that it had already spread significantly. So what was the best thing to do under those circumstances? Well, obviously one needed to take precautions to protect those who were vulnerable, but as such, there wasn't much that we could do to stop its spread, or the idea that we could stop its spread by social distancing and whatnot was a new, untested idea. Now you might say, well, so what? It's untested, but seems like the right thing to do to stop this thing spreading, even if it's only killing vulnerable people. But the problem there was that these measures were going to have an enormous cost. And by cost, I don't mean like economic
Financial,
cost
yeah.
per se. By cost, I'm talking about people suddenly not being able to make a living at all. So I come from India, and one of the first reports that we had about the effects of lockdown was there was a story of a 92-year-old woman who made her living by selling toys on the streets in Delhi. And what happens to that person when you say, sorry, you got to go home, you got to walk back to your village? Well, we know what happens. They probably won't make it. And so that's an extreme, well, that's what's happening in the global south. But even in the UK where I live, the idea of a lot of poor people here and a lot of people who live in very, small houses, have young children, the idea that these kids might not be able to go to school. Some of these kids get their only free meal, their only proper meal in school. So there were all sorts of immediately problems that you knew that the vulnerable people were going to, economically vulnerable people were going to suffer. And so I felt it was wrong to rush straight into a lockdown situation without safeguards for the people who would suffer from lockdowns.
I
So
know
that's
you
the beginning of it. You probably, I can go on and on, but you probably
yeah.
have a question.
You were part of the a big group that were advising the Prime Minister of England. Do you feel like, I know that a lot of people were like saying different things, and there was a big, difference in opinion. But why did the whole world decide on lockdown like it's the right thing to do? Like,
Well,
was it just
fortunately,
contagious?
I wasn't really part of the big group
Okay.
advising the government. I did, on one occasion at least, get asked to present my own viewpoint, but I was very much not part of that group. And most people in that group, they felt, I guess, the need to present a united front, or present their message, one single direct message, which was to lock down. So they dominated what the
Conversation.
government did, and the
Mm.
government had only their point of view, really. There's only one occasion in the UK where they asked me and Professor Carl Hennigan, who also had the view that we shouldn't rush into lockdowns. He's, from a different point of view, he's a medic, so he was saying that from a medical, evidence-based medicine point of view, this is not the right thing to do. So we were only given one audience. The rest of the scientific community, pretty much, were agreed that lockdowns were the best thing to do. I think that why that happened was because they were very worried about the virus, and they wanted to somehow stop or slow its spread until there was a vaccine. I suspect for many of them, and as for myself, lockdown itself was no great imposition. We live in decent houses, even academics in this country do, and we can work from home, we can work remotely, we're not going to lose our jobs. So I think there was a general kind of reluctance to accept the fact that lockdowns were extremely harmful. And that was, I felt, really problematic. But I did have, people saying to me, what do you mean lockdowns are bad? Why would they be bad for you? And I said, open your eyes, look at the rest of the world, look at what's happening to a kid in a council estate down the road. But there was a general reluctance to do that.
I know that
Now,
some countries,
they agree.
yeah, some countries did not really lock down. I mean, they said they did, but they didn't. Like, I know I'm originally from Egypt, and I know that it was not really a lockdown, and there's a big population. And it did, in Egypt wasn't as bad as the rest of the world. I'm not saying the lockdown is good or bad, but I'm saying that what does the data show now after like 4 years after? I know
No,
that, here in
mhm.
Florida, we had different experience. Like Governor of Florida, DeSantis was against it, and the numbers really said it was about the same.
That's right. So you're very right to say that there are two different aspects of lockdown. One is it harmful? And that, we knew but already that was harmful. And 4 years on, we have very good data that school closures and all these other measures were really harmful. But we knew that already 4 years ago. What we didn't know, and what you're alluding to, is could it actually achieve its stated aim, which was to stop the spread? And that was a big question mark at the time. We didn't know. Now we know. And the answer is, as you actually already alluded to, that unless you have a complete lockdown, like the Chinese were able to do, really like lock people up, and take the infected people away, seal them off, even if they're 2 years old. Unless you do that, you never get to that point where you can actually stop the virus spreading. So that's the other aspect of it, is that so you're doing all this, but for what? Because the data now don't seem to show that there's a huge difference in how the epidemic played out in countries which did lock down, which actively didn't lock down in the same way, like Sweden or Florida, and places where, like Egypt, as you say, or India or South Africa, where it was impossible in some situations.
Yeah,
It is not
exactly.
impossible.
Yeah, I know Boris want to jump in. I had just one more to follow up with this. Is we did interview during I think right after COVID, Jeffrey Tucker about the lockdown, who was like a big he was not for lockdown, and we did have also some professors from Sweden talk about the Swedish experience. Um, it's crazy how everybody is so different. For me, and this is what I'm saying, like I infection diseases and all that is very it's very fascinating to me. I had a unique experience. I had a heart transplant right before, actually during COVID. Like I was in lockdown in the hospital before, like in the beginning of January, so I don't get COVID, so I can get the heart transplant. And I had the heart transplant on March 21st, and 2 days later I got COVID while I was in a hospital. But one of I love all my doctors, but the infection disease doctor was a good friend of mine, and she used to come and we talk for hours and hours and hours about different things, and that's why I really appreciate what you do, you know. But there was a lot of terms that was going by, like herd immunity, like a vaccine. Like a lot of people, I don't think they understand what really herd immunity is versus lockdown versus stuff
Yeah,
like that.
well, I can tell you what it is now, but I mean, I don't want to take up. I mean, just first to say, it's a shame that the one place where you'd think you'd want to put infection control measures in place is the hospital. So cardiac patients should not have got COVID, but I'm very glad it didn't
Yeah.
cause you any
No, they were
problems.
very, very, very careful. But I
I
mean,
know,
like
but
it
it's
was spreading
difficult.
at that time in the hospital a lot. I don't know
Yeah,
how I got
I mean,
it,
that's
but
not uncommon, right? People
no,
like the mortality rate for catching stuff in hospitals is actually like
yeah.
shockingly high.
My doctor used to
yeah,
tell me like the worst thing to do is to go to like emergency room if you're not really sick.
it is if you don't want to catch a
Yeah.
disease. But if you need a heart transplant, you don't have a choice. You can't
Yeah.
have that at
Yeah.
home.
The good thing is like I didn't get it before. I did get it after, and it was very hard because you have no immune system. They try to kill your immune system, and then
Mm.
they have to fight COVID. So it was two different things, but it's just like, watching everything going down. So can we talk about herd immunity? And then I know
Let's
Boris is
talk
not
about
gonna.
herd
I got a bunch of
immunity,
questions. Yeah.
and then we can move it. So I don't know why there was a sort of backlash against this idea of herd immunity, which is really a very simple concept, and maybe it's just the word herd somehow rubs people the wrong way. But basically, if you think of a pathogen, a virus, let's say, which is spreading in a population, for the virus, we are its food, its resource. But when we become immune, it's consuming its own resource, its food. So as people become immune, the virus becomes more and more at a disadvantage. So first it starts off and everyone is susceptible, no one is immune, and it can infect everybody. And then it starts infecting people, and then they become, at least for a period of time, immune to further infection. And that's not a good thing for the virus. So that means it slows down. It has to slow down because, if I go into a room and everybody's immune, even if I'm infectious, it's got nowhere to go. So because of that, if you have, the more immunity you have in the population, the less likely the virus is to cause big peaks, big epidemics. It will stay there. It will kind of grumble on, as it is doing now. And the problem with SARS-CoV-2, the COVID virus, is that when it came in, none of us had ever had that particular coronavirus. So it spread and it caused these big peaks. And what happened in the meantime is that we started to build up herd immunity. We became immune. The fact is, we become immune, we lose it, we gain it again. But the overall level now is such that it's now settled down. So we're not going to see any big peaks anymore. We'll still get it. In the winter, it will go up and go down again. But that's just what we call an endemic pattern. It's a stable pattern. It's how we live with many other viruses, including the other coronaviruses. So herd immunity is just really about the buildup of immunity in a population and the establishment of an equilibrium state with the virus where it's just not a problem anymore.
A lot of times, when we, everybody like, as bad as this is, but was that like a crazy, like, did you ever in your career thought that something like that, a global pandemic will happen? Like, it seems like a movie, that what just happened that big.
No, of course I thought it would happen. It has happened before. The virus has spread sort of in 2009, a new flu virus, new lineage anyway, spread through globally. But because we'd already all had several episodes of flu, not that virus, but something related to it, very few people died.
Yeah.
So this is normal for a new-ish virus to arise and spread. So that's quite common. It's just this one obviously was one that did cause more deaths in the elderly and those who are vulnerable than flu did in 2009. But I think we can expect these sorts of events to happen with maybe every 20 years or so. But we do need to be prepared for it, but we need to be prepared in a way that A, protects those people who might die from that new virus spreading, and B, make sure that other people don't die or suffer from the measures that we put in place. It's really as simple as that. It's not rocket science.
You make it sound so easy. My question is, because my personal biases probably err with most of what you've already said, right? So when people are hearing, like, still the world is so divided between people like yourself who would say, look, it's pretty clear what we need to do. This is how we assess harm or harm reduction versus the cost of that harm reduction, everything like that. And these are the mistakes that were made that we need to learn from. And there's still a lot of people, to a layman who seem like they're experts on the subject or come from a field that's relevant, at least, who will say that, mistakes were made within an effort in an emergency situation. And, perhaps some of those were the wrong decisions, but some people still stand by a lot of them being the right decisions. And then obviously, you've got a contingent in the DSA who are still wearing masks outside for whatever reason. There's a weird overlap in that Venn diagram of like revolutionary communists and people who are afraid of, this virus still killing them. It's such a divide. So in terms of trying to think through this type of thing, my personal bias is just not to panic over stuff like this and not to take too seriously. But sometimes maybe I should panic, right? So when I saw this happen, the thing that to me was a weird signal that seemed like at least it's a valid source of concern was the unique property of this virus when it caused people to lose their sense of smell. Could you talk more about that in terms of it seems like such a neurological and specific function that if you don't know a lot about this, it's like, oh, do I need to be afraid of this in a very different, uniquely different way than other coronaviruses or influenza, to where is there some sort of, entire order of magnitude of difference here because of this signal that seems so, I guess, neurologically based?
I mean, that's a really intelligent question and
I
an
wrote that for him.
exact point.
I wrote that for him.
It points it. What
He
it
wrote the
does.
rambling part at the beginning, and then when
he
I
wrote
got
the
to the
rambling, and then
question,
well, you can make claims. But yes, exactly. So there are certain unknowns. And as you said, one of the best things about the question that you raised is that it highlights how, while I've been trying to simplify certain issues, that of course there are also complex issues. There are nuances, and one has to think carefully around them. And the language of sort of flattening everything to, okay, this is what you have to do, and this is evil, or putting value judgments on how people behave was problematic in that regard. But let's go back to what you said. Okay, losing the sense of smell, which I did. I think I got it in kind of late December of 2019, and it took a long time for me to recover my sense of smell. And so it does attack particular nerve cells, which then do appear to lead, and there are some sophisticated work now to show exactly why it prefers or has a tropism, as we call it, for those particular cells. And that is, it's not a great, it's a significant loss to your, enjoyment of life if you lose your sense of smell. It's not something that you can just say, oh, well, that's fine, we'll just carry on. So it doesn't mean that it's more lethal than something like flu, which in fact is much more likely to kill you than coronavirus at your age, or now that it's endemic. But indeed, there were certain aspects of it. It was a new virus, and it did have, so we did react to something that we'd never seen before in ways that we wouldn't to those that are circulating now. So there were some careful sort of trade-offs to think about. So you might say, well, as an individual, at an individual level, I would prefer to shield myself until there's a vaccine, something like that. You could make that individual decision because, even if it's just going to cause my sense of smell to go away for a while, that's not something I want to. I can afford not to take that risk.
but
What
in
was
terms of
wrong is that what was
Sorry.
wrong is that you can't then say, I don't want to take the risk. So rather than me doing what I need to do to shield myself, I want you out there who can't afford to take that risk, because if you did so, your children will starve. You don't want to put that cost onto someone who can't bear that cost. You can take it yourself. So that's kind of where that decision-making process pivots on.
Well, so I agree with everything you're saying, particularly in principle. But in terms of essentially people losing their shit, in terms of someone being willing to give up their rights, let's say, in terms of like steel manning that perspective that in a particular catastrophe, like in a war, we might give up certain fundamental rights that we'd normally, in principle, never, consider. So in this case, and I don't even mean losing your sense of smell as a loss in terms of personal experience, but in terms of a signal that there's a categorical difference. It's scary. It's something where it's not just about losing your sense of smell, it's that there's something affecting my brain. Could this be an entirely different And again, to somebody who's educated, it's much easier to see the scientific aspects in terms of what is or isn't difference in this case, and what is or isn't a signal that there's a real alarm bell that should be ringing. But to somebody who's a layperson, who's there's different experts saying different things, and some might be saying, look, this is a global emergency, we need to shut down the world, there's a virus and it does something to your brain, it stops you from smelling, and that's just the most visible, obvious thing we know. But this is, to somebody who doesn't know, how do they think through that, and how do they differentiate whether this is a signal where I need mommy and daddy government to take over, this is a global catastrophe, and if we don't give up our rights and maybe allow the people that are infected to be taken off into an island, or the most extreme scenario, how does one think through what's categorically different here and what's something that we need to slow down and stay calm and think through slowly?
You're absolutely right. Depending on what the actual effect of the virus is, you would behave differently. So, okay, in this case, there was some loss of smell for some people, myself included. But and after it was clear that it wasn't going to kill you anyway, and also that there were data that showed that loss of smell was temporary, that it was going to go away. We could think through it, but what But of course, if you have a completely different type of virus where it's killing people, let's say you're going to have to do something completely different. So I don't think it's so much about mummy and daddy state or authoritarianism. It's more that as a community, what should we do? The government is nothing but, or shouldn't be anything but the medium through which we enact what we as a community decide. So it's not really about should we wait for them to tell us what to do. It's more about what, as a community, should we decide, oh, well, I don't want to lose my sense of smell, even if it's just for a few months. I would rather children didn't go to school now and incur those costs. Those are tricky decisions, but at the same time, and then there are two things to consider there, which have already been raised. A, will children not going to school stop you from getting the virus at all? Which turns out not to be the case. And secondly, even if it did, are you willing, or are we as a society willing to impose that cost onto children? So those are the critical issues. But I think what I like about what you're saying and the way you're saying it is that we all need to be very careful and considerate about how people might have behaved given what they perceived the risk to be. So there is a tendency on both sides of the argument to ridicule others for doing what they did, for blaming people, for insulting people, for defaming people, for the decisions they took. And that really isn't completely unhelpful. As you say, what if you woke up and you thought, oh my God, this makes you lose your sense of smell? It can't be that harmless. That's a completely reasonable way for an individual to react. And so if they then felt scared or didn't want to go out or felt everyone should stay at home, it's the job of the government, it's the job of the scientists who are looking at the data to reassure them, or indeed, even better than that, just to give them the facts. One of the things that happened during this pandemic is that the general public were treated as if they had no brains, as if they could not figure anything out. Now, there are lots of things most of us can't figure out, like talked about rocket science, theory of relativity. That's difficult. But most of the basic dynamics of a virus spreading through a population and the data on who it's killing, what it's doing, are not something that an average person can't get their heads around. So that's what should have happened. People should have been told very clearly what the risks were, what the costs might be, and how. I mean, obviously, someone's got to make a decision. So the government will make that decision. But to be transparent about how that decision making happened is something that was missing. And there was a general sense of, there are only a few people only the elite have the knowledge of what should be done and could be done. And that was the problem.
Yeah, I think though, I mean, there's millions and millions of people died during COVID, and I also feel like at some point, yes, we're talking about reasonable people if we tell people like, oh, but what if somebody, like a lot of people were not reasonable during COVID. A lot of people even during lockdown, they were still going out and partying and not caring about, and it's fine if you're healthy and you feel and this is your decision to do it yourself, but I don't think it's fine if you can put somebody else in risk.
Yes.
So to leave it completely up to the people, I'm not sure. I think like we should tell them about obviously the risks, but I feel like a lot of people, especially in the younger side, are very, or some people, it's different even here from state to state.
Oh, I don't know. I thought the younger generation were incredibly thoughtful and
Not where I lived.
Yeah, I will say,
Yeah, there was
I'm no.
parties and clubs open
Well,
during.
that's the thing.
No,
That's
but
the
that's
thing.
fine. You see, clubs being open is fine. Just don't go and visit vulnerable people. I mean,
No, but that's what I'm saying. They would do like they would go out and do whatever and then go out and just do back to their, some of them even worked in like what we call it, like emergency workers.
yeah, that's not good.
So yeah, so I feel like it's a lot easy to say, how would we handle it in certain ways. I think that it's obviously hard. There's some decisions that need to be made when you are leading and be like, obviously you have to listen to the experts, that know, but a lot of them did not know. And the other thing I think we have to talk about is like during that time, and I want to know your personal feeling about that. We have, let's say, three different groups of people. One group who thought that the whole thing was a hoax. This didn't happen. There's no virus. There's nothing. This is all just whatever. And then it turns, I think the other two groups, most of them were motivated politically. Like some be like, oh yeah, and some people like, no, they're trying to do this. Here in the United States, obviously with Trump, Biden, and all this is like Trump did not want it to lock it down, but he kind of had to after getting all these advice. In a state to state, you saw California locked down, Florida did not. A lot of people moved to Florida. A lot of people. So I feel like when you deal with, and not to mention like everybody have three followers, would say something, about their own experience and how they know. And some influencers, some people were like, I remember like even Joe Rogan was talking about certain things about like, oh, there is no, virus. And then, there's no vaccine. Like, I'll take this. COVID doesn't matter. I'll take a couple of things. He apologized later or corrected later. But a lot of people were talking. How do you feel like you as an expert in the middle of all this when people say, oh, that doesn't exist? I mean, I personally, when I was in a hospital and seeing people dying next to me all the time, I was very insulted by people saying like, oh, it didn't have, there is no virus.
I'm very disappointed at the moment, actually, by a lot of these various kind of, I would say, uninformed or really quite extreme views that some people have become attached to, who during 4 years ago, I thought were being rational about the whole thing. So, as you say, there are a group of people who've latched onto the idea that there was no virus or that it was not somehow a pandemic. And I'm not sure what that is all about because, yes, there was a new virus. We absolutely 100% know it was a new virus. These days, we can sequence it, we can visualize it. This thing is new. It's related to, as I said, a number of other viruses. There are 4 other viruses in that family, which are also circulating, 2 of which are very close cousins. But it's new. Not only is it new in terms of its genetic code and what it looks like and all of that, it's clear that in people, vulnerable people, either who are immunocompromised or old, immunosenescent, they died. So I don't understand why it's important to people to say there was no virus at all. That's very disappointing to me. Then there are other sort of issues that people have become very attached to. One is to do with the vaccines. So there are a whole bunch of people who are very, very keen to prove that the vaccines did more harm than good. And I think that's problematic because although there have been people who've been damaged by the vaccine, and I very strongly said that the vaccine shouldn't be given to young people, shouldn't be given to anyone who's not vulnerable, because there's always a small risk attached to these things. On the whole, I imagine that it has saved quite a lot of lives. If I were in my 80s, what would I have done during this pandemic? I would have shielded myself, and then I would have got the vaccine.
It's a great accomplishment for, I think, mankind to do this vaccine as fast as we did.
Exactly. And so obviously there were problems that then arose with how it was rolled out and who it was given to, and the fact that elderly people or vulnerable people weren't prioritized in many parts of the world. And there are lots of problems with it, and I know people who've had bad reactions to it.
Would it be fair to categorize that for certain, would it be fair to say that for certain demographics, it does more harm than good?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think so. And I think that's something that, both sides, there's just this disagreement, and I don't understand where it's coming from because, if you're an 18-year-old male, you're not going to die of with a healthy male. You're not going to die of coronavirus. Even, I didn't feel I needed to take the vaccine, but I am over 50, or I was over 50 when I took the vaccine. Still am over 50. I thought, okay, I'm over 50. You've got to have a cutoff somewhere. Give us the vaccine. Don't give it to anyone under 50, unless they are immunocompromised. But that didn't happen. So, and the argument for that is exactly what you're saying, which is that, it has a risk, but it's always better than getting COVID. That's not true.
Well, I guess like a lot of things from what we learn is like a lot of things that we don't know. And I feel like a lot of people, I never seen anybody in any interview in TV, medical or not, or political or anything, say, I don't know. They don't, they always have to have an opinion and defend that opinion. And I always feel like in any topic, people used to make a research and they make up their mind. Now they make up their mind first, and then they look for research to support them, and they will find it because there's always somebody that's gonna have the same issue, But it's to say that there's no COVID or there's no virus, or play it down or play it very up. I think there's a lot of motivation was around,
And another issue that is coming up a lot is whether the virus was made in a lab.
I was gonna get to that. Yeah. I'm as I said, I'm very fascinated about this topic. So I wanted to ask you, because of the lab, why is an infection disease in general, they always look for patient zero or try to understand, because I think my friend is patient zero, but anyway, that's another topic. Tony Darrow, comedian, he was in He was actually in Asia at that time and came back to. I think he's at least a patient zero for the United States. But anyway, what is the different theories about? So I understand that we want to know where it's coming from, but what is patient zero is very important. And what's your explanation or theory of the lab leak versus it came from life?
I personally, I don't think it was a lab leak.
Okay.
If you try and make viruses in the lab, or even it's very difficult in the lab to make something that will compete successfully with the other viruses in the wild. So I don't think so, but like that is what you said, people never say they don't know. I don't think we know. It could have been a lab leak, there's a possibility. But for me, it's much more likely that it was already circulating before we detected it in Wuhan, that it had already spread through China, probably quite
So it didn't
considerably.
come from a bat?
Probably.
Because I stopped
Probably.
eating bats, so it's no.
It's not about eating, it's just about a bat being somewhere near you,
Yeah.
being near a bat. So, these spillovers do happen, and that's something, for which we have evidence. We know that happens. Things do spill over. Deadly diseases like HIV they are zoonotic in origin. Many diseases are zoonotic in origin. So I think the simplest explanation, to me, the more likely explanation is that it was of natural origin. But I have complete respect for those who think that it came from the lab, or indeed people who are investigating whether it came from the lab. And it is very unfortunate that that discussion has kind of become so toxic.
And just to be clear, when we say where do you think that it came from, we asking an expert. But if you're like me or Boris, you have no opinion. Don't say, oh, well, no, it came from a lab. Oh, it came from bat. Like some people, it's
Oh, I got
crazy.
opinions.
What is
I know
your
you
opinion?
do. I know you do. And I see the guitar behind you, so you made a song
What's
out
your
of it.
opinion then?
What is
No,
it,
I mean,
Boris?
I don't know where I don't have an opinion on actually where it came from. I meant that hyperbolically, but I do have a question in terms of like how toxic, as you said, the conversation is discussing so many of these things. It makes, I think, a very common question is if this happens again in the future, did we learn anything from this? And I know you mentioned earlier there's this sort of performative unity that happened among sort of a fake consensus where there wasn't a discussion that was allowed in certain spaces. And it almost, I'm like, on the one hand, are we just going to see the same thing if this happens again? On the other hand, I'm like, or did those, because there's that expression, never let a what is it, never let a good emergency go to waste. Who was that? Kissinger? No, not Kissinger. Rumsfeld. Anyway, never let a tragedy go to waste, something like that. There's obviously some people who also, or systems that also benefited or were incentivized, maybe not in totally malicious ways, but were incentivized. If you're a company that gets this contract or benefits somehow from this, whatever else it is, it's very easy for someone, not because they're evil, but just because the incentives are there and they're human beings, to go with the flow or convince themselves to take certain perspectives on. And so, A, did we learn from this? And B, might there be even the opposite, where now that people are expecting this performative unity, a thing that happens a lot of times in states like where I come from, the Soviet Union is, or now Russia, is you get a performative disagreement too, like people are almost expecting someone to disagree. So there's specific voices that are allowed to disagree in specific ways and also a performative way. And so it's like, is there a way out of this? Can we be in a better place the next time this happens in terms of public discussion and governmental decisions and have it? I mean, in the simplest thing, just can it be less toxic in the future?
That's exactly right. So where we should be placing our bets, or the systems we should be trying to strengthen and sanitize, really, are those decision-making processes and also academia in general, where this performative unity, which is a great expression, tends to prevail now. And also as you say, the influence of certain actors, big pharma, big tech. We need to have systems in place that can operate with some degree of independence from those interests. And again, not to malign anyone particularly or say they were out to make a quick buck or, from this. But as you say, these interests, there's a confluence often of interests and things go in a particular way. There are, of course, bad faith actors within this, but it's more that the system needs to be resilient to those people who say, hey, I know, let's get everyone to wear masks, and I'll give my friend who makes masks or has a contract to make masks. I mean, obviously all of that corruption, what can you do about that? But overall, to counteract that sort of thing, we need to get away from that performative unity that is kind of, in some ways, it is sort of perpetuated by having, a small number of people funding all the scientific research, for example. So it's all about power. I mean, if you have all the power concentrated in the hands of certain bodies who distribute all the funds to the researchers, or certain, charities in this country, the Wellcome Trust or the Gates Foundation, they have a huge amount of influence on scientists, and to the point where scientists can't afford to go against what's being said, because you don't want to ostracize yourself from that community.
To follow up, do you feel like
I
after
have
4
to some
years,
extent.
do you feel like after 4 years we actually reach that point? Is there any change do you see within the system? Not necessarily the money, because I
No.
know that will never change, but within the experts themselves, within the people in the industry, do you feel there's any change? There's open monologues now, like, oh yeah,
No, I
maybe
don't see any particular change. I mean, I think people have calmed down at an emotional level. But there's, some people. So, for example, I endured quite a lot of frank defamation. So there were people accusing me of being paid really by tobacco. I mean, by the Koch brothers, or serving different interests, which was really problematic. That was really not where I'm coming from.
why
Now,
would they accuse of that? And how do I get paid by the Koch brothers? I want to.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know, they come and say, would you like a new swimming pool or
Yeah, I
something?
know.
So there were lots of defamatory remarks made, particularly because at the time it was sort of being anti-lockdown was seen as a Trumpian position.
Yeah.
Even though Trump himself, as you said, put those lockdowns in place
Yeah.
in the end. So but none of the people, and then there were people who challenged what I was saying scientifically, but didn't just challenge it, which would be a good thing, because that's exactly what you want debate, but just tried to shut me down, or just accused me in various ways of just being either stupid or a shill of some sort. None of these people have apologized or admitted they were wrong. Nothing like that has happened. So I think it's quite problematic. I do think that, and I have approached a few people saying that what we need to do is actually put on debates, have people come together and talk about their different viewpoints. And at the end of it, shake hands.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't
exactly, yeah.
want
That's
to.
exactly how it should be. That this is one of the problems is, I think during any emergency, that people will shut some voices that regardless if they're right or wrong, you cannot. It's like,
Exactly.
okay, I'm
Mhm.
gonna do it my way. No, you have to listen to all of the voices and then
Oh,
collectively make it.
exactly. And you can't always, just like, this whole um, such issue that you brought up about um, the losing your sense of smell and what that actually does to the psyche. And there are all sorts of interesting, even within the questions that you think you've broadly answered, there are nuances always. There are ways that people will be thinking. There are things you will not have thought about yourself. And none of us, of course, is right on everything ever. Um, so, and even if we are, there's always going to be shades. So
Yeah,
it's useful to have a discussion
yeah,
where you say,
and
"Well, maybe you were right about school closures, but what about this? What was this family supposed to do? Where they have the kids, they've got grandparents living with them who are vulnerable. Well, what are they going to do
and
if the
I
kids
think
go
that's
to school?"
important. That's very important. I think we have, and that's why it's like 4 years after we still haven't figured. I feel like we need to have a study by neutral experts and say like, okay, this is what was wrong, this is what was right, this is what we do if it happened again. These are the things that, and people that should get credit that for something, it's not personal, not because I said something,
Mm,
let's say I disagree with you and then I turn out to be right. It doesn't mean that personally I'm better than you. It just,
mm,
or I wouldn't apologize for you because it was I'm a person, I'm all that. It's all science, all, this is, they complete each other. But we yet have not, and you never learn. Experience is not about going through something, it's about reflecting on that something. Otherwise you're gonna keep going and it's gonna happen over and
mm,
over and over. you know
It
I'm
is.
interested in you saying the mathematical model that you use in infection disease in general. So it's all numbers, like, what, can you explain that?
No, they're equations. So
Hmm.
you use mathematics to build models of systems, but you use equations to try and understand them. It's like, how did we send rockets to the moon? Many, many years ago, Isaac Newton wrote some equations describing how the physical world operates. And from that, we were eventually able to derive enough of an insight to actually send a rocket to the moon. And similarly, like when a virus arrives in a population, yeah, you can say, okay, it's going to spread, it's going to spread. That as it starts spreading, people become immune, so then the spread will slow down. All of these things, but it to actually think through where it's all going to end up, it's very useful to write down a set of equations that kind of describes everything that you know and captures all of that knowledge and then allows you to see what will happen as a result of those processes. And so if you write down some equations in which you have people who are either susceptible, infected, or immune, and just make sure that people move from one compartment to another, depending on a set of rules, which describes what happens in real life, then you start to see what happens. You say, the infection will grow, and then too many people will be immune, so it's going to start to fall again. But then people start losing their immunity, and it will rise again. And this all happens with the backdrop of seasonality. In some seasons, it spreads quicker than in others. And putting all those things together, it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. Now, if you're really, really clever, I guess maybe you can do it without the help of any tools, but mathematics is a tool that helps you put all those pieces together and build a picture. So that's all it is, really. It's not, unfortunately, people have started to use mathematical models as like crystal balls into which you can look and say, in 20 years' time, this is what will happen. I'm
Mm.
afraid that's not what they're good for. What they're good for is looking at a number of pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and bringing it together. But once you've done that, that gives you enormous power to think about what you should do next. And so
And
one
for
example I use is I'm working now on a universal flu vaccine that will protect you against all strains of flu. And that idea for that arose from a mathematical model. So
Is that an RNA? Is that an mRNA vaccine?
no, It's not a vaccine. It's not. It doesn't. So mRNA is a platform. So you could use mRNA to make it, but it's really what we've done is we've figured out how you can. Basically, we figured out that all flu viruses, not all flu viruses, but among the whole population of flu viruses, they appear to be very diverse. So you might say they all have different hats, but actually they only have 5 jackets. So if you put those 5 jackets into one vaccine, you can protect against all flu viruses.
I see. So it's not a categorically different type of vaccine. It's just looking for a different thing
It's
that your immune system can
using a
recognize.
different, yes, it's deciding what to target rather than a new platform.
So
Well,
how do you think, because so much of this ultimately to me seems to be a relationship of trust or distrust between those in positions where they can understand and communicate these mathematical models and people responding to them. And I feel like a lot of those people that one might malign, who are either, people who have, let's say, entered an emotional state, where on one side you have people who are not just going to take it lightly because they feel like someone's trying to take away their constitutional right, their right to earn a living, the right to run their business that they've put their entire life behind. And then on the other side, you have people who think that you're recklessly trying to kill their grandma if you don't take on certain behaviors that are being instructed to. And and even those people at this point kind of even like turned on Biden because he didn't want to keep lockdowns for long enough and he didn't want to restrict things for long enough. And like I said, there's still some people in DSA meetings that are wearing masks outside that just don't. They've reached a different type.
Wearing mask is
I mean,
not
they're
bad.
just.
Well,
Okay.
outside it's a little goofy. I'm not saying wearing a mask
I
categorically is
actually
not
don't
bad.
think masks are very helpful. I mean, that the data doesn't suggest they are inside or outside.
And it
Masks.
depends on the type of mask, right? If it's like an N95, that's
Yeah,
firm
but what I mean, you
placed
can't go.
No, but there's a lot of people that maybe don't know. Like I have to wear a mask, because of my transplantation when I in a large crowd, But people will look at you crazy. It's like, why is this guy wearing a mask? So we never
Yeah,
know.
that's the problem. Is that I think that what I would, in your case, what I worry about more is whether the mask will actually protect you or not. I'm not worried that you're wearing a mask.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was worried about. What worried me about the masks was not whether people were wearing them because they thought they might protect them.
Yeah, some people wear a shirt and it's like, oh, this is my mask. I was like, seriously. But I have to say something because you were so calm while you're saying that you are, you came up with a new influenza vaccine. If I flip a bottle, I'm so proud of myself. I yell, I tell everybody, and you're
You
like,
should. I wish I could.
but I'm saying you came up with a vaccine. You like
Everything that you do should be a source of joy to you. That's what life is about, and that's what
no,
our
but
duty
good for
is.
you. Like, let's take a moment. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Well, let's see if it actually does. It will be an accomplishment when it saves lives. I mean, a
yeah,
lot
but
of
that's
young
the
people,
fact is
children
like
in Africa die
when
of
when
flu,
when
and
somebody
that's
like
why.
you or like a lot of people in this industry try to spend years of their life try to come out with something to save lives, people should take a minute and pause and think about that while that you're making the vaccine and somebody else is making a lot of money out of it, but your thing is to save
Yeah,
lives,
I would really like to find a way to make it without, it being a source of income. Well, the thing is, obviously, it has to make some money so that we can make it
yeah,
at
of
all.
course, yeah. Sorry,
The
Boris, I
huge
interrupted you.
profits that are associated with these things that are so essential to save lives,
No, it's
I
good.
think
It's good to make. You should. It's a
problematic.
business. You should make profit. You should create jobs. But that money,
You could
you've
have
got
a
to research.
not-for-profit vaccine business. You don't
Huh?
have to. You don't have to make a profit on a vaccine. You can make
Yeah.
profit on handbags. I mean,
But I'm saying even if you make profit for the vaccine, dedicate some of it to studies to create something
of
else.
course, yeah,
Like
that's one way of doing it. No
Well,
yeah,
so
there are different ways of running these things.
yeah,
What is problematic is when the profit reaches, that becomes your focus.
yeah,
It's not about making a profit.
yeah.
It's
Of
about
course.
greed. It's not the profit itself. That's fine. You
So
have
my
to.
question was going to be more on how to those people that I was talking about. We got sidetracked with maligning the mask people because Hatem's self-conscious about it. But my question was more so okay, I don't always want to hold those people responsible in the sense that on both sides, because people have different sensibilities. Some people are quicker to panic or quicker to get a flight or fight or flight response, let's say. And a lot of those people are responding to what's being communicated to them by the
That's
people who are working those models. And so there's a trust that's been eroded, both because of the way that conversation has been handled, maybe because of the lack of people taking accountability. And I will say Chris Cuomo did publicly apologize to Joe Rogan and say he said that he takes ivermectin now and or whatever. And
I don't
not to
even
get
know if
in,
ivermectin works. I can see that.
I think as a prophylactic, I'm not sure exactly.
I'm
Not to
not
get to
sure how
not
it
to get
can,
into that. I'm just saying he
but
did seem to
yeah,
show some accountability as somebody who maligned Joe Rogan, who then was like, there was no reason to malign the guy. He wasn't
it's
telling other
all
people
about
what to do.
maligning people and blaming people. Why does it have to be about that? If you see someone wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, why do you have to have an opinion about them?
Exactly.
Right. But there
That's
is
That's the point,
it's like a
isn't it?
piece of maybe it's psychological. Some people comfortable with it. Let them be. I
Yeah,
know
if they're
comics.
comfortable with it,
Yeah.
why?
but it's
Exactly.
also
I think lack of compassion is an inability to feel what the other person is feeling
Yeah, you
is
have
a,
no no passion. Boris,
Mhm.
shame on you. I agree.
well, I don't have as much passion as some of these people, that's for sure. But
Passion
I
or compassion.
Compassion.
both. But I will say I if I'm trying to be compassionate, a lot of those people I feel like have legitimate grievances that are being misplaced because there's things outside of their locus of control. It's much easier to bash somebody wearing a mask or not wearing a mask on the street than it is to recognize how powerless you might feel to people who are shutting down your business, or on the other hand, to people who aren't taking the right, measured steps to handle these things as that trust
Yes. Mhm.
erodes. So, I mean,
So
even something, even like mathematical models, we were shown models about what happens about the curve flattening in 2 weeks, and
mm,
those models didn't seem to quite play out. And so, to a lot of
mm,
people, it's how aware, my aunt is a nurse, and
mm,
very early on in the virus, that she's not like she's actually retired now, but she was a nurse during COVID, and she made some very simple statements that I'd read elsewhere that seemed like total common sense. Just the idea that like the virus is going to mutate, it might get worse before it gets better, but also because of the way the viruses mutate, as a virus becomes more contagious, it likely becomes less deadly because then if it's more deadly, it's killing off the hosts and it's not as easy to spread. Just basic principles that are sort of like you said, they're not outside the reach of a layman
mm,
to understand that if a virus kills you quickly, it's not going to lay dormant for 2 weeks and infect people in you and things like that. And
mhm.
so a lot of those people in that position lost trust in people on both
Yes, because they
sides.
weren't communicated to carefully enough. They were told, here's the model. I know what's going on. This is what's going to happen. You, layman, don't know how to deal with this. So shut up and go and do what we tell you to do. And that's really not how to run a country, how to run a society. That it just isn't. And so that should never have happened. But I think, the power that comes with telling people, you know what's right, and they don't, is I guess it's addictive. At the same time, obviously, there are, it isn't possible for everyone to write down a mathematical model and to figure out what's going on. So there has to be this dialogue between people, and it's never going to be perfect. And what people need to be taught is how to think critically rather than panicking. Um, where one needs to step in, which is why I did, is where people are unaware that some of their actions are going to cause enormous harm to themselves and to their children. And that
Um,
somehow people got blinded to that.
and Boris, just to your point with the mask, I think some people are freaked out by seeing other people wearing masks versus, and I think it's all, in the mind. I think people should do whatever they want or whatever they feel comfortable with. I know that you think maybe they wear a mask because they still traumatized, but maybe they just want to wear a mask. They feel better about it. But I see a lot of people coming to other people with, why are you still wearing a mask? It's like in their mind, they want to forget about that time. So wearing a mask simplifies. While if you travel, especially in Asia, it's a very common thing, to wear a mask. It's not a problem. But
They do a lot of goofy stuff over there.
yeah, I'm sure. But I think if you want to wear a mask, you should wear a mask. If you don't, it has nothing to do. But if you're wearing it for, health reasons, you should wear the right mask, ask your doctor. But I think back to Dr. Gupta's like point is like, and I feel like we owe it to the millions of people that died, to all the people that work during, the emergency workers, the doctors, the nurses, everybody. We need to sit down and really have a conversation about what happened, why did it happen, what was right, what was wrong, not personally, because I'm sure everybody was trying, but you can try and
Yes.
be wrong.
I think I think one should accept that as the basic uh, principle that, that's a good assumption that everyone was trying. No
Yeah.
reason to believe. I mean,
But
there were
people,
one or two people who were simply out there to make a noise and, have their
yeah, of course you're gonna have those people, but I feel like
profiles.
they
I mean,
get
I'm
the,
talking about scientists as well as
yeah,
they just wanted to be out there and be
yeah,
known
and it's a
as
chance. It's
the
just like,
saviors or whatever.
just like we see in the war now, some people coming in and becoming bigger, and they love that, attention, and they stick with their point. But not everybody that disagree with you is conspiracy theory or
No,
vice
most
versa.
people I think were acting in good faith.
Yeah,
I'd like to think so.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
Some got, mhm.
But if they are acting in good faith, I think it's time to have a conversation and say, "Oh, I was wrong and I was right."
I
And
agree.
we owe it to those people. So, last question before we go, and thank you so
Yeah.
much for all this and for your time. So, with all this, and you're a novelist, you write novels.
Yeah.
So, tell us about your novel.
Well, my
Is that like
novels,
you escape from the mean world?
no, it's not an escape at all. It's the opposite. I mean, I like writing novels that deal with problems,
Okay.
that we face problems or at least situations that in the physical world. So you could say that the coronavirus, that the science that I do are about problems that we face in the physical world. But most of us aren't thinking about what virus is going to get us or whether we're going to die of some disease or we're not thinking about physical problems most of the time. Most of the time we're thinking about emotional problems. So that's what composes life is first of all the troubles that we face in our interactions with other people, all the losses we have in our lives, all the times of grief, of despair, of loneliness, um, of miscommunication between people, and then also the beauty of the world that we experience through art and music and and the ugliness of it. So, there's the physical life, and then there's your kind of actual emotional life that I'm interested in both. I'm interested in living. So I didn't ever want to just do one thing. No, I don't think anybody does. I mean, okay, for me, I write novels, but that guitar back there suggests that there's
I would suggest, but he's
much
not
else.
good.
Can he play it?
I
Can he
taught for
actually
many
play it, or
years.
does he
Yeah.
just hang it up?
You know that kid that shows up to the basketball court willing, like all dressed up in basketball, like he's the one that you don't pick. So tell us about your novel and before we go.
So what I'm saying is that's so for me, writing novels is my way
Yeah.
of exploring life. And so I wrote four novels in the 1990s when I was quite young and kind of before I had children, really. So that was a time when I had more flexibility with my time and was able to write more regularly. And then since then, I've only published one novel, which is about 15 years ago. But then I've written another one, which my literary agent is sending out as we speak. I actually finished it before COVID. I finished it in 2019, and then we were just getting ready to send it out, and then the pandemic came. So that's been on the back burner. And then I've just started writing a new one, and it's just something I really love doing, and I'm just very lucky that they've been published. And that's I'm very fortunate. So
I
there
think
you go.
I think we all ought to be alive and to be here and to be, healthy and all that. And thanks to people like you and everybody in the medical field. And again, I think, if I hope whoever listening to this, we do stuff like that. We do like, we get together and we learn, reflect on what happened and try to
Reflection
avoid
is
it.
one of the nicest words, I think, that
Thank
we
you.
have, to reflect. So science is a way of reflecting on the physical world, and art is a way of reflecting on everything else, which is equally important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. If people want to follow you
Great.
or, on social media or get in touch with you or get your novel or your website, would you like to share this information?
Yes, sure. I can send them.
Where can they find you?
Where can they find me? Well, I do have a literary website,
There you
which
go.
is just under my name. So,
And I'll have the link in the description for your website as well.
okay, great.
Boris, if people will want to learn guitar or come to one of your shows, what do they do?
They should hit up Dan Smith for learning guitar. But just at the Boris K online, I got most shows listed there.
And this is Live from America podcast. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk with you all the time. Thank you.